I never thought planning a wedding in England would make me feel like I was 15 again, standing in the hallway of my childhood home with my heart thudding against my ribs, clutching a secret that could rip my family to pieces. Because somehow, after all these years, the same woman who nearly destroyed my parents' marriage is now the reason my father says he might not feel comfortable coming to my wedding. And the worst part, everyone seems to be looking at me, as if I'm the one creating the problem. My fiancé and I never even wanted a proper wedding to begin with. We're both the sort of people who prefer quiet things. Small dinners at cozy pubs, weekend drives through the countryside, slow mornings when the house is silent except for the kettle boiling. When we got engaged, the original plan was simple. Sign the papers at the registry office, have dinner afterwards with a few close friends, and leave it at that. No drama, no stress, no massive guest list. But my dad was the one who pushed us into doing something bigger. "Come on," he said to me on the phone one evening, his voice carrying that familiar tone he always used when he wanted to talk me round. "You only get married once. Don't cheat yourself out of the memories." At first I pushed back, properly, but eventually I gave in. That's always been my weakness with him. He has this way of making me feel as though saying no is somehow unkind or unreasonable. As if I just explained myself a bit better, I'd realize he was right all along. So now we're planning a small wedding for this summer. 75 invitations sent, expecting maybe 60 people to actually turn up. Just immediate family and the friends who've been part of our lives for years. Or at least, that was the plan. Then my dad asked the question that made my stomach knot instantly. "Listen," he said casually during one of our wedding planning calls. "Would it be all right if I brought Karen?" Karen, just hearing her name felt like biting into something rotten. To understand why her name still hits me like that, you have to go back more than 15 years. Back to when I was still a teenager. Back when my parents were still married. Karen had been around for ages. She and my dad met through an outdoor club. They were both mad about cycling and hiking. At first, she was just one of the group. Someone who turned up at summer barbecues or joined my dad on weekend rides through the hills. But my mom always had this look whenever Karen's name came up. Not anger. Not exactly. More like quiet discomfort. The sort of tension you can feel in a room when nobody is saying what they're really thinking. At the time, I didn't fully understand it. I was a kid. Parents had odd friends sometimes. I didn't think much of it until the night everything changed. I remember it clearly because it was one of those ordinary evenings where nothing important was meant to happen. My dad had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he popped out to the garage. My mom was upstairs folding washing. The house was quiet, and for some reason, I picked up the phone. Even now, years later, I can still feel that moment in my chest. The hesitation, the guilt. I knew it was wrong to go through somebody else's messages, but my mom had said something earlier that week that stuck with me. "I think something strange is going on with your dad and Karen." She tried to laugh it off afterwards. Tried to make it sound like a joke, but the way her voice cracked, I knew it wasn't. So I opened the messages. At first it all looked harmless. Conversations about cycling routes, travel plans, photos of hills, campsites, and walking gear. Then I scrolled further, and suddenly the words on the screen felt as though they were searing into my eyes. "I miss you. I wish we could just disappear somewhere together. I love you." There were dozens of messages like that. Flirty jokes, private references, long late-night conversations that were very obviously not about hiking anymore. My stomach turned so violently, I thought I might be sick right there in the kitchen. I remember gripping the edge of the counter because my hands were shaking so badly. This wasn't some innocent friendship. This was something else. Something ugly. Something that made me feel like the whole house had suddenly tilted sideways. When my dad came back in, I confronted him immediately. I didn't plan it. I didn't rehearse anything. The words just burst out of me. What is this? I held the phone out towards him, the screen still open on the messages. For a split second, his face went completely white. Then he snatched the phone from my hand.
"Oh my God," he muttered. "You went through my phone?"
He didn't deny it. That was the first thing I noticed. Instead, he started pacing around the kitchen, dragging a hand through his hair.
"It's not what you think," he said quickly.
That sentence, those exact words, has been burned into my brain ever since, because I had just read messages where he literally wrote, "I love you." How else was I supposed to take that?
"We're just friends," he insisted. "You're misunderstanding everything."
I stared at him.
"Friends don't send messages like that."
His voice cracked then, and suddenly, he started crying. Not quiet crying, either. Full body, red-faced, shaking sobs.
"If your mom finds out about this," he said between breaths, "she'll leave me."
The way he said it made my chest tighten, not because he seemed sorry, but because he sounded frightened. Frightened of consequences, not guilty.
"Please," he said, "you can't tell her."
I just stood there, frozen. I was only a teenager. I had no idea what the right thing to do was. Part of me wanted to pretend none of it existed, but another part of me couldn't stop thinking about my mum upstairs, folding washing, completely unaware that her husband was telling another woman he loved her. And something inside me snapped, so I told her. The fallout was every bit as awful as you'd imagine. My dad immediately blamed my mum. Said she hadn't been emotionally supportive enough. Said he felt lonely, said Karen. Understood him in ways your mum never did. I remember sitting at the dining table while they argued, feeling as though the whole house was collapsing around me. Eventually, my mum told me to leave it alone. "We'll sort it out," she said quietly. But something in our family had shifted, and Karen never disappeared. Even after my parents separated years later, she stayed in my dad's life. They traveled together sometimes. Hiking holidays, cycling events, weekends away in little Peak District villages. He always insisted they were just friends. And technically, she's married to a woman, which somehow made the whole situation feel even stranger. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But every time I saw photos of them traveling together, smiling beside each other on some windswept trail, that old nausea came back. Now fast forward to the present, to my wedding, when my dad asked if Karen could come. I took a slow breath and said the most neutral thing I could think of. We're trying to keep the guest list small, which was true, but it wasn't the real reason. The real reason was simple. I do not want the woman who helped break my family sitting at a table while I'm walking down the aisle. There was a long pause on the phone. Then my dad sighed. "I just think it would mean a lot if she could come." My chest tightened. "No," I said again. That was when his tone changed. "You don't trust me, do you?" I closed my eyes. Of course I don't. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I repeated that the guest list had already been finalized. And then he said something that has been echoing in my head ever since.
"I have my own reasons why this matters," he said quietly.
"And I'm disappointed that you won't even try to understand." I could feel that old, familiar pressure creeping in again. The manipulation, the guilt. The same feeling I used to get as a kid, when he'd push and push until I eventually caved. But this time, I didn't. At least, not yet. Still,
Ever since that conversation, one question has been chewing away at me. Am I actually being unfair? Or am I finally drawing a line I should have drawn years ago? I wish I could say that conversation ended there. That I hung up, shook it off, and went back to planning flowers and table plans like a normal person. But that isn't what happened. Because once my dad decides something matters to him, he doesn't let it go. The next morning I woke up to 3 missed calls and a text from him. We need to talk about this again. Just seeing those words made my stomach drop. I stared at the screen for ages before replying. Part of me wanted to ignore him. Another part of me already knew that if I didn't respond, he'd just keep pushing until he got some kind of reaction. So I rang him. He answered straight away. "Hi," he said, as if nothing had happened the night before. His tone was calm, almost cheerful.
It's something he's always done, resetting the conversation as though the previous tension never existed.
"Morning," I said quietly. There was a short pause.
"So," he began, "I've been thinking about what you said."
My heart was already beating faster. "I understand you want to keep the wedding small," he continued. "But I really think you should reconsider letting Karen come." There it was again, direct, persistent. I shut my eyes and leaned back in my chair. "Dad," I said slowly, "we've already finalized the guest list."
"Well," he replied quickly, "it's only 2 more people, Karen and her wife."
The way he said it made it sound as though I was being ridiculous for refusing, as though adding 2 extra names was nothing. But it wasn't about the numbers. It was never about the numbers. "It's not about space," I said at last. Silence filled the line for a moment.
Then he asked the question I'd been desperately hoping he wouldn't ask.
"Then what is it about?" My throat tightened. I could feel that old memory forcing its way forward again. The kitchen counter. His phone in my hand. Those messages glowing on the screen. "I just don't feel comfortable with her there," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "Are you still hung up on that thing from years ago?" he asked. The way he said it, so dismissive, so casual, made something twist inside my chest. "That thing?" "Yes," he said, sighing as if he were tired of explaining himself. "You were a kid. You misunderstood what you saw." I felt my pulse pounding in my ears. "I did not misunderstand messages that said, 'I love you, Dad.'" His voice sharpened. "We were going through a complicated time." The familiar script. The same explanation he'd used 15 years earlier. "I've told you before," he continued. "Karen and I are friends." Friends. I nearly laughed. Instead, I rubbed my forehead and tried to keep my voice steady. Friends don't beg a teenager to hide messages from their mother. That struck a nerve. "I never begged you," he snapped. "You cried and said Mom would leave you if she found out." Silence. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then his tone changed again, softer now, manipulative in a different way. "I just don't understand why you're still holding on to this after all these years." "Because you never took responsibility for it." But again, I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I said something simpler. "It's my wedding." Another long silence. "I know," he said quietly. Then he added something that completely caught me off guard. "Karen has been part of my life for a long time. She matters to me." My stomach dropped. The way he said it didn't sound like a casual friendship. It sounded heavier, more significant. "I'm not asking you to like her," he continued. "I'm just asking you to respect that she's important to me." Respect. That word made something bitter rise in my throat. Where was that respect when I was 15 and he asked me to keep his secret? Where was that respect when my mum sat crying at the dining table while he blamed her for what he'd done? I took a slow breath. "I'm not trying to disrespect you," I said, "but I do not want her at my wedding." Another silence stretched across the line. Then he said quietly, "You're putting me in a very difficult position." There it was, the guilt. I felt it straight away, like a weight settling on my chest. "What position?" I asked. If someone important to me isn't welcome, he said carefully, it makes things complicated.
For a second, I thought I'd misheard him.
You're saying you might not come? I didn't say that, but he didn't say he would come either. And that uncertainty sat there between us like a storm cloud. My heart started racing. I had always imagined my dad walking me down the aisle. Even though our relationship has always been messy, he's still my dad. I'm not asking you to choose, I said quickly. I'm just asking you to respect one boundary. But he didn't reply immediately. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded tired. I thought you trusted me more than this.
That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said.
Because the truth was,
I didn't trust him.
and he knew it. I have to go, I said at last, my voice barely above a whisper. Think about it, he replied before I could hang up. After the call ended, I just sat there staring at the wall. My tea had gone completely cold. My hands were shaking. And all those old memories I thought I'd buried started rising again. The kitchen. The messages. My mum crying quietly in the sitting room while pretending everything was fine. Later that night, I told my fiancé what had happened. We were sitting on the sofa, wedding spreadsheet open on his laptop. He listened quietly while I explained everything. The whole history. Karen. The messages. The phone call. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath. Blimey, he said. Yeah, I muttered. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said something that caught me by surprise. You do know you're not wrong, don't you? I blinked. What? This is our wedding, he said. Not your dad's. Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten with emotion. I just don't want to create some massive family row, I admitted. He reached over and took my hand. The row already exists, he said gently. That sentence sat with me for a long time because he was right. This didn't start with my wedding. This started 15 years ago. In a kitchen with a phone full of secrets. But even knowing that, the guilt still lingered, because at the end of the day, there was still one question haunting me. What if my dad really does choose her over being there when I get married? And if that happens, would that finally prove my instincts about their relationship had been right all along? Or would it prove that I'm the one tearing the family apart? The next few days felt like walking around with a storm cloud over my head. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach flipped. Part of me expected another message from my dad. Another attempt to reopen the conversation. Another push to make me change my mind. But instead, there was silence. And somehow that felt worse. Because when my dad goes quiet, it usually means he's thinking, planning his next angle, waiting for the right moment to try again. Meanwhile, wedding planning kept moving forward, whether I was emotionally ready for it or not. My fiancé and I had meetings with the venue, the caterer, and the photographer. People kept asking cheerful questions, like what flowers we wanted, and what song we'd use for the first dance. And every time someone mentioned the wedding, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Would my dad even be there? I tried to push the thought away, but it kept creeping back. A few nights later, my phone rang while I was making dinner. Dad. My heart started hammering. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but I knew I wouldn't relax until I knew what he wanted. So I answered. Hi, I said cautiously. Hey, kid, he replied. That word, kid, always softens me a little. He's called me that since I was little, but tonight it didn't work the way it usually does. There was tension underneath his voice. Listen, he said after a moment. I've been thinking about our conversation. Here we go. I leaned against the counter and waited. I don't want to fight with you about this, he continued. This is supposed to be a happy time. Then let's keep it that way, I said quietly. Another pause. Then he sighed. You're still saying no. It wasn't even a question. Yeah, I said. The word just hung there. No, Karen. No extra guests. He exhaled slowly. I just wish you'd try to see things from my perspective. My jaw tightened. In what perspective is that?
That she's been part of my life for a long time, he said. She's someone I care about deeply.
There was that phrase again. Care about deeply. I swallowed. You've made that very clear. His tone sharpened slightly.
You're making this sound worse than it is.
Am I? Silence. I could almost hear him thinking on the other end of the line.
You're acting like she destroyed our family, he said finally.
My chest tightened. She helped, I replied quietly. Your mother and I had problems long before Karen. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. But that wasn't the point. You still asked me to lie for you, I said. He didn't answer straight away. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded tired. I was scared. That caught me off guard. I didn't want my marriage to end, but it did, I said softly. Another silence. Then he said something that made my chest feel hollow. Karen was there for me when everything fell apart. Of course she was.
She supported me, he continued, when everything else was coming undone.
I rubbed my forehead. I'm glad you had someone, and I meant that. At least, partly. I never wanted my dad to be alone. But that still didn't mean I wanted her sitting in the front row at my wedding. This isn't about punishing you, I added. Then what is it about? He asked. I took a deep breath. It's about how I feel when I see her. That seemed to confuse him. What do you mean? I searched for the right words, but the truth was messy. When I picture Karen, I don't see a cycling partner or a hiking friend. I see those messages. I see my mom crying at the kitchen table. I see 15-year-old me standing in the middle of a fight I never asked to be part of. She reminds me of the worst moment in our family, I said at last. The words came out quieter than I expected. For a long time, my dad didn't answer. When he finally did, his voice sounded different, less defensive, more thoughtful. I didn't realize you still carried it like that, he said. How could I not? Another pause. Then he asked something unexpected. Did your mom ever talk to you about what happened back then? Not really. She told me to drop it, I said. So I did. But clearly I never really dropped it, because the feelings were still there, still raw, still unresolved. My dad let out a slow breath. I never wanted to put you in the middle of that. You did, I said. He didn't argue. For a moment I thought maybe the conversation would end there. But then he spoke again. You know Karen is married now, right? I know. And her wife would be coming too. That detail didn't change anything for me. If anything, it made the situation feel even stranger. They're both good people, he said. I'm sure they are. But being good people didn't erase the past. Finally, he asked the question I've been waiting for. So this is final? My heart thudded heavily. Yes. There was another long stretch of silence. Then he said quietly, all right. That was it. No argument. No guilt trip. Just, all right. It should have made me feel relieved. Instead, a strange uneasiness settled in my chest, because my dad rarely gives up that easily. Before hanging up, he said one last thing. I hope you know I love you. My throat tightened. I know. But after the call ended, I sat there, staring at my phone again.
Because the conversation had ended, but the tension hadn't.
And one thought kept circling in my mind. What if he really does decide not to come? Would I regret standing my ground? Or would I regret giving in? Just to keep the peace. Because deep down, I know something about my dad. If I cave now, this won't be the last boundary he tries to push. And if there's one thing getting married has made me realize, it's that sometimes becoming an adult means finally deciding where those boundaries are, even when the person standing on the other side of them is your own father. For the next week, nothing happened. No calls from my dad. No messages asking me to reconsider. No passive-aggressive remarks dropped into casual conversation. Just silence. At first, I tried to convince myself that was a good sign. Maybe he had finally accepted my decision. Maybe we'd reached that quiet, uncomfortable truce families sometimes settle into when nobody wants to keep arguing. But something about it still felt off, because my dad has never been someone who lets things go quietly. The silence felt less like acceptance and more like the calm before something else. Still, life kept moving. My fiancé and I carried on planning the wedding. Seating charts, menu tastings, ceremony timings. All the little details that slowly turn an abstract event into something real. One night, we were sitting at the dining table with a stack of RSVP cards spread out in front of us. My fiancé was sorting them into piles. Yes, no, maybe. He looked up and smiled. Your cousin Mark's coming. That's good, I said. He turned over another card. Your Aunt Linda as well. I nodded absent-mindedly. Then he paused. Your dad still hasn't replied? My chest tightened immediately. Of course he hadn't. The RSVP deadline was only a few days away. Everyone else had responded, except him. I'm sure he will, I said quickly, though my voice sounded less confident than I wanted it to. But inside, my thoughts were already racing. Was this his way of protesting? Waiting until the last minute? Or worse, was he genuinely thinking of not coming? That thought made my stomach twist. No matter how complicated things were between us, I had always imagined him there, standing beside me, walking me down the aisle. Those are the sorts of moments you grow up assuming will happen. Even when your family is messy, even when the past is complicated. A couple of days later, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I rang him. When he answered, his voice sounded normal, almost too normal. Hey kid. Hi, I said carefully. We spoke for a few minutes about ordinary things. Work, the weather, some walking trip he was planning. The conversation felt strangely polite, like two people pretending not to notice the real subject sitting between them. Finally, I said it. Dad, I notice you haven't sent your RSVP yet. There was a pause. Yeah, he said slowly. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. My heart started pounding. Oh? He cleared his throat. I've been thinking a lot about everything you said. I waited. And I understand how you feel, he said. The tension in my shoulders loosened slightly. But, he added, of course there was a but. I still think you're being unfair to Karen. My chest tightened again. I'm not asking you to change your opinion of her, he continued. But she's someone important in my life. I pressed my fingers into the edge of the table. We've already talked about this. I know. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. But if someone that important to me isn't welcome... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The meaning was obvious. You're saying you won't come. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Another pause. I'm saying it puts me in a difficult position. The same phrase again. My heart was pounding now. Dad, I said quietly, this is my wedding. I know. Then why does it feel like you're trying to negotiate it? I'm not negotiating, he said quickly. I'm just asking you to think about what this means. What this means. I let out a slow breath. What it means, I said carefully, is that I do not want someone there who reminds me of one of the worst moments in our family. Silence. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that surprised me. You know, Karen knows about that. I blinked. What? She knows you saw the messages. My mind stalled. What do you mean she knows? I told her years ago. A strange chill went through me. And she still wants to come? Yes. The idea of that made my stomach twist. She said she'd like to meet you properly someday, he added. I actually laughed then. Not because it was funny, because it felt absurd. Meet me properly? Yes. After 15 years. I know it sounds odd, he admitted. Odd didn't even begin to cover it. Dad, I said slowly, I don't hate her. That part was true. My feelings were more complicated than simple hate. But I do not have a relationship with her, I continued, and I do not want to start one at my wedding. Another long pause.
Then he said quietly, "You've always been stubborn."
That made something inside me snap slightly. I learned from you. For a second, I thought he might argue, but instead, he gave a small chuckle. And then he said something I never expected. You know what? What? You're right. I froze. I shouldn't have put you in the middle of that when you were a kid, he continued. The words just hung there. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear him say them. And I shouldn't be putting you in the middle of this now, he added. My chest felt tight. So what does that mean? He took a slow breath. It means I'll come to your wedding. Relief flooded through me so suddenly my eyes stung. Really? Yes, but Karen won't be coming. I swallowed. Thank you. He let out a small sigh. I'm still disappointed, he admitted. I know. But you're my daughter, he continued. And this day is about you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "I'll send the RSVP tonight." When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. My fiancé came into the room a few minutes later. Well? He asked. I let out a long breath. He's coming. He smiled. That's good. And it was. But as I sat there thinking about that conversation, another thought slowly crept into my mind. My dad had finally accepted my boundary. But the real reason this felt different wasn't because I had won the argument. It was because, for the first time in my life, I hadn't given in. And maybe that's what growing up actually looks like. Standing your ground, even when the person pushing back is someone you love. I'm still trying to make sense of all of this. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more of my story, make sure you subscribe.